It all occurred on April 5th, 2015. That date is etched in my memory as if it marked a profound rebirth. Back then, I found myself in a complicated, familiar situation. I'm an engineer, an individual driven by a relentless pursuit of control. I had always steered clear of drugs and alcohol, avoiding any experiences that would compromise my mental faculties. In essence, anything that entailed surrendering control over my mind had no rightful place in my life. On one side, my father had recently received the devastating news of a terminal cancer diagnosis. This forced me to confront the harsh reality that someone incredibly dear to me would pass away within my own lifetime. Until then, I had been fortunate enough to avoid the profound loss of someone so intimately connected to me. Aside from the loss of a grandmother when I was a girl, nothing else. Suddenly, I was thrust into the stark reality of confronting imminent mortality, and it left me pondering the profound concept of death. It was a moment of awe and introspection, as I had previously held a staunch disbelief in anything beyond the realm of life itself. My scientific mindset, steadfast and unyielding, had prevented me from entertaining notions of an afterlife or the existence of a higher power. After all, I questioned, who could convincingly demonstrate the existence of God to me? I had a simple mindset. If you can't prove it, I won't believe it. So when it came to death or similar concepts, I was skeptical. I knew that many people had theories, especially through religion. They often claimed that after we die, we go somewhere else. But here's the thing, I didn't buy into any of it. I always asked, where's the proof? Show me scientific data. I needed more than just words and beliefs to consider something real. However, I've also encountered people who possess an incredible sense of serenity when they see someone is going to die. They witness the passing of others, and, while they may grieve, they accept it as an inevitable part of life. Yet, deep down, I couldn't shake off a peculiar feeling. I couldn't help but question the strangeness of it all. Is it truly the end? Is everything truly over once we die? Obviously, I used to believe that death meant the end of everything. However, I couldn't help but ponder the concept of death. It made me fearful and apprehensive of confronting the possibility that there might be nothing beyond it. Alternatively, even if there was something after death, I wondered, if there is something there, what is there? We don't know anything. What should we do? Do we have to do anything? Well, I pondered these questions for a while. In April, I decided to take a vacation and attended a meditation retreat in the Gredos area, here in Spain. I opted for the retreat to have a different vacations to quiet the mind. I had heard that meditation had scientific benefits, like enhancing mental clarity and such. That's why I decided to go on that retreat. It wasn't anything strange or out of the ordinary. We simply engaged in some morning meditation, practiced yoga, dancing, and took walks in nature, typical things. And then, in that retreat, there was a woman, one of the participants I had brought along. She shared with us her wisdom about Tantra and breathing. This woman, originally from Venezuela, had a deep understanding of Tantra as a means to connect with life, death, and everything. And then she suggested an exercise, saying, I propose an exercise that will help you overcome your fear of death. Naturally, my initial reaction was to express my disinterest in participating. However, my curiosity got the better of me, and I couldn't resist asking her, Monica, how exactly do you plan to alleviate my fear of death? With some physical exercises, right? And I asked her, do we have to take drugs, inhale any substances, or drink something? I mentioned that I wasn't interested in doing any of those things because I wanted to maintain a clear mind and be fully aware of what was happening. She said to us, No, there's no problem with that. In fact, I'm not going to do anything, and you don't have to do anything either. It's much simpler than you think. If your inner self desires you to have this experience, which she referred to as an experience, then you will have it, and if not, that's okay. Not everyone has the same experience because, in the end, it's about using breaths to relax, disconnect, let go of control, and connect with your essence in some way. So I said, well, all right, but that doesn't seem like it will alleviate the fear of death, does it? I thought it would be more like a meditation or something. The thing is, we proceeded with the exercises, and I must say they were quite simple. Very simple indeed. There was no need for hyperventilation, apnea, or anything like that. I didn't want any of that either. I didn't want to hyperventilate and enter an altered state of consciousness. I mean, it was nothing like that. It was all super normal, simple, and at that moment, I thought, I've been deceived by this. Well, maybe you do connect with that sense of belonging to life and such, and perhaps in that naturalness, you suddenly connect or integrate death within yourself. I don't know, that's how I understood it. The thing is, in one of the movements, you had to suddenly throw your head backward while releasing the air downwards and so on. And it was precisely in that exercise when this experience occurred. And then, of course, my scientific mind pondered over it for a year or two. I kept thinking about it to understand what had happened because it occurred naturally, without taking any substances or hyperventilating or anything of that sort. And, well, at a congress where several doctors and individuals involved in the subject of death gathered, there were several doctors who contacted me. I won't go into detail because it's lengthy to tell, but they reached out to me after hearing about my experience. I told them, hey, this happened to me. I did these exercises. But what I experienced felt like death. I felt like I was in another place. They explained to me that what I had experienced was not uncommon. It wasn't the first time they had heard or seen something like this, not only during exercises, but also in other situations in which you could have a clamping in the vagus nerve, which is a nerve that connects the brain to the rest of the body, all the way down to the sphincter. And then, of course, if you were to puncture or sever this non-electrical or neurological communication, the brain would receive a signal that the body is dead. It would perceive the absence of a heartbeat as a signal of death. It is what they called a syncope of death due to the pinching of the vagus nerve. Anyway, back to the story. At that moment, I don't know what happened from the outside perspective, but from what I saw, my body must have collapsed like a sack of potatoes, similar to the sudden deaths we sometimes witness, perhaps in certain athletes. But of course, I didn't see that, because what truly happened to me was that when I made the final movement, when I looked up, the next thing I felt was being propelled at an incredible speed, a speed that is beyond our comprehension here, perhaps even surpassing the speed of light. Then, thinking from my scientific mind, I thought that it must have been the speed of light, right? I don't know. Ultimately, I imagine that if there is something that departs from our body when it remains behind, I would perceive it as light. So I shot upwards entirely, without any sound, at such an astonishing speed that I didn't even have time to process what was occurring. No, it was emotional and so fast that you don't even know. It's like being propelled from a slingshot, but you don't hear it. What I do recall is that suddenly a white light emerged that turned into a multicolored light. So pure fantasy was that. I even perceived a sound. Actually, in the initial moments when I was propelled, I heard a sort of sound like, I don't know how to explain it, but, well, the thing is, boom! Suddenly I found myself in another world. It was like I had been reset. I don't know how to explain it because I don't remember. I mean, I don't remember thinking, oh, what am I doing here? What happened? And it was as if I had always been there, as if I had been there for all eternity in that space. And then, no, my brain didn't think, how did I appear here? Where did I come from? I didn't remember this attendance at all, the one you see now. And well, what I do remember, but mostly you remember it when you come back, because when you come back and return here, to this, let's call it, I don't know what to call it, a dimension, because it feels denser, more full of pain and all that. That's when you realize the ecstasy of the life you experience there. I mean, it's indescribable. In fact, every time I try to explain it, I feel that I am becoming less and less capable of conveying its true nature. Because, of course, it's a sensation that I believe does not exist here. I say believe because I have never experienced it myself. And actually, when I try to imagine the sensation, it's like envisioning the most pleasurable feeling you have ever experienced in your life. The absolute pinnacle of ecstasy, beyond anything you have ever experienced on earth. Well, even so, it doesn't capture what I felt there. It was like suddenly everything was perfect, flawlessly perfect. There wasn't a single opening for doubt to creep in. I always describe it as it is. That's the phrase I used to repeat to myself the most upon returning. It was like there, I felt more like myself than ever before. It's different here in this place we're talking about. I don't feel like myself. There's always something, some problem, doubts, fears. I don't know. But there, no, everything was perfect. It was already perfect. Everything was accomplished, done. Everything was just perfect. And of course, there was a feeling that I would describe as love. It's a sense of unity, of communion. Actually, there were more people there who, of course, had faces and looks that were especially amazing. It wasn't just about their physical beauty. I mean, their faces were flawless without wrinkles, spots, or dark circles. But beyond that, it was as if their gaze exuded life, a vibrant liveliness, kindness, and a sense of security. Not the kind of security that stems from self-confidence, but rather a healthy level of certainty, without feeling superior to others. I distinctly remember being mesmerized as I looked at them, not out of surprise because I belonged to that place, but rather I was awestruck, thinking to myself, wow, this is so cool, I love this, this is my thing, I am a part of it, and I am like that too. I mean, it was like looking into a mirror. They were other people, but it felt as if I knew deep down that I had the same face, the same sense of certainty, beauty. Well, the thing is, all the words you say fall short. They don't fully capture the sensations we experience. Here we have the word, right? Certainty for everybody. Anyone you ask on the street can tell you that certainty is certainty. That means I even feel that here, certainty does not exist. Here, there is always some doubt. Certainty weighs, certainty collapses under its own weight. It's like, boom, that's how it is. And the thing is, you never doubt it at any moment. And that doesn't exist. Here, there can be faith, or maybe confidence in something, but not certainty. Well, the same goes for all words. Love. When I talk about love, when I talk about unity, when I talk about everything I experienced there, well, they don't exist. I can't find words to describe it in a way that we can understand from here what it's like to live there. And the story goes like this. I was so calm in my world, in the real world of my entire life. But then, at that moment, I started to sense something on my back. I began to feel a presence behind me, something pulling me, tugging at me. And I couldn't help but wonder, what is happening? At that very moment, I saw a woman sitting in front of me on a kind of throne-like sofa chair. But here's the thing. She was the same woman with a breathtaking face, eyes filled with certainty, and a genuine kindness. Well, I mean, I haven't seen anything like it here, and there may be things that resemble it, but not quite the same. And I also had the sensation that I had two additional people here, but they were very young, almost like children. And in that moment, I felt as if they were pulling me back, and then I couldn't help but wonder, what is happening? That's strange because the entire experience here has been going smoothly, but at that moment when they started pulling me back, something or someone, I turned around to see what was happening. I distinctly remember turning to see what it was. And in that moment, I noticed an immense force pulling me backwards, pulling me further away. And along with that, the typical thing happened where darkness was behind me. As I moved away, I found myself engulfed in darkness, and the image of the reality I was living in started to fade away in the distance. Of course, in that moment, my mind became super alert and super conscious to see what was going on, to understand what was happening. It was as if I didn't know, as if you were having a conversation with a friend in a coffee shop, and suddenly a UFO appeared and abducted you, leaving you in a state of disbelief. The feeling of surrealism that must have overwhelmed me was beyond description, as I had been there with my friend in the coffee shop one moment, and then found myself being abducted the next. And what is this? Who is taking me? And where are they taking me? I couldn't help but wonder who was taking me, and where exactly I was being taken. Where was I going? I was completely lost and confused, unable to comprehend anything that was happening. Suddenly, I began to hear a voice saying, come back, urging me to return. And I kept saying, now, yes, I'm trying to go back, to return to my place, to my home, to where I truly belong. I was desperately attempting to find my way back, but it seemed as though everything was going in the opposite direction, and the voice urging me to come back was echoing in my ears. At that moment, a thought crossed my mind and said, but if it's you, it's yourself asking you to come back. So just relax and trust, because at that moment I did trust myself. I was in a good state where I had faith in my inner messages and intuition. Of course, it occurred to me that I was the one asking myself to come back. So I decided to relax, trust, and not be afraid. I told myself to let go of the need for control, to release the thoughts of wanting to go back or understanding what was happening. I remember letting go, and that's when the odyssey of the return began. I often describe it as an odyssey because it was through the process of returning that I came to understand everything I had experienced. Why? Well, the first thing I noticed as soon as I let go and relaxed was a physical sensation of pressure. It felt as if my head was being compressed by a steamroller, as if I was entering a space where I didn't fit. My head felt like it was about to explode. The sensation of it reaching a breaking point was overwhelming. It happened in a split second, even though I describe it here with time. As I recall so many details, it's because I have a mind that tends to focus on the intricacies of events, being a person with a sharp attention to detail. I remember all my dreams in great detail, so that's where I derived all the specifics. The challenging part is that the next thing I noticed was, well, it's difficult to articulate. It was a sudden sensation that I didn't know how to name. These sensations were unpleasant, quite unpleasant, and I found myself gradually receiving information in some inexplicable way. And then I found myself thinking, oh, what is this? It feels familiar, but it's so unpleasant. What is this? What could it be? It was a flood of negative emotions, doubt, fear, and pain. It was as if everything that didn't exist on the other side, so to speak, was suddenly present. I began to experience and feel it. The next thought that crossed my mind, naturally, was, where am I? It's all darkness. In that moment, a longing for my place, my home, and my loved ones arose within me. I wondered, where are they? Then I recall observing myself, similar to how I recall dreams, and noticed that certain external images started to fade away. Involuntarily, I recall desperately trying to hold on, but many images were indeed erased. However, what remains vivid in my memory are not the images themselves, but rather the intense feelings and emotions, the sensations and emotions that you experience there. Those 2 or 3 specific details I mentioned earlier, such as seeing people, but many other things were erased, repeatedly saying, no. I witnessed something foreign to me erasing those memories, and as they vanished, I sensed new information coming in from the other side. But it occurred at the same rapid pace, light. It's as if there's no time to process it, but you somehow integrate it. So yes, the initial sensation was that physical crushing feeling. The second sensation encompassed emotions, this uncomfortable and intangible discomfort. Naturally, I began questioning where I was. It was then that I felt like I was filling out what I call my curriculum, as if reciting my personal information, my name, place of residence, profession, and so on. As I approached the end of this recitation, I thought, okay, so far so good. But I couldn't find any amusement in it. Well, to some extent, I thought it wasn't amusing to return here because it was like, okay, I didn't remember I had a life here. And the last realization that dawned upon me, prompted by my ongoing questioning, was that I was in Gredos. I couldn't fathom why I was there with that woman, engaged in some exercises. I had an okay, but at that instant it was as if a mental switch flipped. I don't know if the woman intended for that to happen, but indeed the act of doing those exercises had taken place within my experience. It didn't happen to everyone, obviously, as it's not common for everyone to experience a complete clamping of the vagal nerve. And it's not easy to achieve even when attempting it intentionally. Then at that moment, I recall the relief when I finally succeeded in opening my eyes and comprehending my surroundings, as well as realizing my own identity and all that it entails. Well, the first thing I remember is that I was lying on the floor, of course, and they were pounding on my chest, I guess, to revive me. And of course, I heard this woman repeatedly saying, "Come back, come back, come back," and so on. So, at that moment, I was freaking out. Later on, I recollected the sequence from the movie The Matrix when they show Neo. I watched The Matrix when it was released in 2000, and this incident occurred in 2015. So, I had almost forgotten the details of the movie. However, I had a flashback of Neo when he is shown the alternate reality and is required to accept or assimilate it. When he returns to his actual reality, so to speak, he experiences a strong shock and starts to vomit because he can't fully comprehend it. I recall that the others were gathered in a circle, all looking at me. One of them remarked, "Look, have you seen the look on her face?" Undoubtedly, I must have appeared as though I was hallucinating, because what I had experienced in that moment felt much more real than this. Suddenly, even in my current surroundings, everything felt dense and lifeless, as if everything had been disconnected, burdened with immense physical and emotional weight. On the other side, however, there was no such heaviness. There existed a sense of physical lightness and emotional lightness. Naturally, I couldn't believe it. The first thought that crossed my mind remained unspoken. First of all, I struggled to speak. It was hard for me to speak, but the initial thought that crossed my mind was akin to a metaphorical expression. Like, wow. In other words, I contemplated the existence of two parallel dimensions, one being remarkably intriguing, while the one we currently inhabit seemed to lack the essence of reality. This notion completely astounded me. I had been confined within my structured world, firmly believing that this life, as I knew it, constituted the entirety of existence. You were born, you died, and little else. In essence, I couldn't fathom the existence of anything beyond that. However, when I experienced it so intensely, when I realized that I was more myself than ever before, it was as if a weight lifted off me. In comparison to that profound experience, the subsequent days felt dull and lifeless. Well, maybe I looked at a glass of water and thought, yes, it is a glass of water. But somehow it felt false to me. It was as if I were watching a Hollywood movie with a backdrop of New York City, and it felt artificial. It was as a friend tells you to come to a movie studio, claiming they shot a film set in New York, and you see a painted cardboard representing the city. You instinctively know that it's not the real New York. Imagine someone insisting that the cardboard cutout of New York is, in fact, the real city with real houses and people living there. Yet you confidently reject their claims, knowing deep down that it's merely an artificial representation. Well, the same feeling enveloped me when I observed things around me. They appeared familiar, but also lacking authenticity. It was as if I was surrounded by cheap imitations, akin to scenes on a movie set. And naturally, all these thoughts swirled in my mind. The story of not believing in anything, transitioning from being an engineer to suddenly encountering this new reality. And of course, 100,000 questions flooded my thoughts. Initially, I went for several days without eating, not because of any specific reason, but simply because I didn't feel hungry. I felt a sense of fullness, contentment, and fulfillment, as if I were trying to assimilate everything within me. It was like a profound realization, as if I had discovered the essence of my existence, my true nature. I didn't dare to share my experience with anyone, not even within that particular setting. After all, if someone had come to me 5 years ago and shared a similar thing, I didn't believe in that, and I would have thought that was as a product of meditation, a hallucination, fabrication, or even considered them to be mentally unstable. So, naturally, I hesitated to reveal my own encounter, as I realized others would likely react the same way, disbelieving and skeptical. Then, of course, I also struggled to believe my own experience. I was in a state of disbelief, trying to process and integrate everything that had happened. Additionally, upon returning, one of the most shocking aspects was the realization of where I had been and who those people were. As I regained my awareness and examined my memories, I vividly recalled the faces of the individuals who surrounded me during that time. And the last person I mentioned was a woman sitting on a throne with 2 children beside her. And suddenly it dawned on me that this woman is my mother in this existence. However, there, in that realm, I didn't perceive her as solely my mother. Instead, I felt a sense of equality between us, viewing her as another being on the same level as myself. I didn't feel distinctions of I'm young, I'm old, you are my father, you are my son. I didn't experience that same sense of differentiation there. It was as if those distinctions didn't exist. Everything and everyone felt interconnected. It was like everyone has an undefined age. The relationships were also free from distinctions of being my mother or a stranger. It was a profound realization that shook me. Here on earth, my mother, like all of us, has gone through suffering, pain, and various life experiences. As a result, we lose some of the beauty we possess, both physically and, more importantly, emotionally. Doubts, fears, regrets, and personal stories fill our lives and shape our emotional states. And I believe that also reflects in our facial expressions and gaze. People I encountered there seemed to possess a certain enlightenment. It's difficult to explain, but it was as if they radiated a light that I haven't seen in many people here. In contrast, in this earthly existence, most of the people I come across, including myself at times, carry a look that lacks that same radiance. Instead, there is fear, pain, sadness, and doubt. There is a constant internal struggle of what should be done and what should be avoided. There is no certainty. All of that, and this aspect also deeply shocked me. I found myself questioning whether I had access to forgotten memory, something buried within me. For about a year, maybe a year and a half, I felt the presence of my inner voice, the voice that guides us, telling us what to do and what not to do, urging us to take action or to stay put. That inner voice that speaks to us. I noticed that the voice had changed. It was my voice, but there was an overwhelming certainty. It was crushing. However, the other voice I have always had, it's as if we constantly doubt it, our intuition, our feelings. We second-guess ourselves, thinking, no, perhaps I am mistaken. Maybe it's not like this. Well, I would say that with this voice, we don't feel the certainty it has, perhaps because we tend to question it. On the other hand, this voice was extremely certain, very, very certain. I remember it was my voice guiding me to make decisions effortlessly. I was thinking about it a lot for a long time, thinking whether it was real or not. I woke up every day and my inner voice, let's say my little voice, urged me to check if it wasn't real. At that moment, the memory of what I had experienced rushed back to me, and it was mind-blowing. It's not that it wasn't real. It's just that every time I go there, I perceive it as more real than this reality. How is it possible that if it was just a memory, if it was merely something stuck in the brain, it feels so much more real than being here alive? What distinction does it make? I don't know, at least I don't know. That question kept arising within me, and ultimately, a few months later, my father passed away. Of course, I experienced it with a lot of serenity, understanding, and above all, with a sense of tranquility. I was convinced that he was going to a better place. I didn't even dare to mention my experience to him because it's a delicate moment when someone departs and truly leaves, and you know that their time is running out, mere hours remaining. It is very difficult, even if you both know it, to open up and say, "Don't worry, this is all a dream, and now you are going to wake up in another reality nicer than this one." I did express it to him in my mind, and there was a moment when he was already unconscious, and I whispered it softly. And of course, that brought me peace of mind, didn't it? But at the same time, I continued to question, and a month later, something came into my life. It was through a YouTube video where a neurosurgeon named Eben Alexander appeared. He had written a book, and being a reputable surgeon and scientist, he titled it Proof of Heaven, as if to assert that he had scientifically demonstrated the existence of life beyond death. And of course, at that moment, I thought to myself, I have to read this. So I read the book and wow, I was overcome with emotions. I got goosebumps and tears welled up in my eyes because this man narrated his experience, and it was strikingly similar to mine in certain aspects that are not commonly shared. For example, not remembering one's existence here. I mean, perhaps there are some of us who enter so abruptly into that state that we don't retain any memory of having been here before. Later on, I became interested and started researching. It was almost a year after my experience when I discovered that it might have been a near-death experience. That's when I contacted, or rather, when doctors contacted me and they explained it to me. I thought to myself, well, it makes sense, it really does. Because in that moment when the body fails, even if it's just for a fraction of a second, I now understand, based on what I have lived through, that we are more than just a physical body, but of course there is something driving it. And I also witnessed it with my father. I suppose those who have experienced the loss of someone close can relate to this. It can be quite shocking to see someone who was once alive, with their own personality, thoughts, and opinions, suddenly transform into an empty, motionless body. He no longer speaks, moves, or has a personality. It's as if he has disappeared entirely. The essence of who he was is no longer present. And this raises the question, who or what resided within that body? Speaking, moving, making decisions, and expressing opinions. It can't be solely attributed to the physical aspect of the body. I understand it in that way. Therefore, I believe that we are not just physical beings, but there is something inside us, a form of energy, consciousness, or whatever term one may use, that inhabits our bodies. However, when the body ceases to function, even for the briefest moment, that consciousness can no longer remain within it. It can't stay. It is as if an unalterable condition exists. When the body is in motion, alive, the consciousness can exist alongside it. However, when the body ceases to move, ceases to live, the consciousness cannot remain. Thus, at the moment when the physical connection is severed, the consciousness departs rapidly, almost instantaneously, akin to the speed of light. At least that's how I experienced it, and it returns to its origin. That's the theory I have. In my conversations with these doctors, I came to understand that this occurrence is more common than it may appear. There have been people who, when I gathered the courage to share my experience with them, have written to me and they have said to me, I had an accident with my bike when I was a child, and I went through the same thing you did. But of course, in their case, they eventually got up, walked home, and perhaps never ended up in the hospital. However, they experienced a blow to the head, a blow to the chest, and suddenly, their heart stopped beating. At that moment, consciousness departs, and if the heart starts beating again, as it did in my case, because in my case, the presyncope of death is supposed to cause a brief cardiorespiratory arrest, the body stops, or at least the brain receives a signal indicating so. Then, in the end, you regain your health, your heart starts beating again, and you can breathe again. That's it. I mean, it was a brief moment of death. So, of course, I realize that many people have had similar experiences during highly traumatic events, or when they believed they were going to die due to severe illness while being in a hospital. But, of course, I didn't have the idea that I was going to die, so I'm not sure if that's the reason why I don't remember my time there. No. What I mean is that I didn't recall my life here during that experience. On the other hand, there are others who do remember it. And I imagine it's because they were in that moment of thinking, I'm crossing over to the other side, but I have a life here that I'm leaving behind. I don't know, I have no idea. The thing is, just by listening to Eben Alexander, I believe in it. I realized I'm not crazy because this man, whom I don't know at all, describes very similar things, the colors, the music, the return when you come back. It's all very perplexing. He also encountered a person who was still alive, a relative of his, things like that. Then, well, I felt more at ease, but it was still challenging for me to start sharing it. In fact, I began sharing it publicly, showing my face and all. It's been less than a year, maybe almost a year, but I haven't had the courage to talk about it until now because I know that many people like me have preconceptions about this subject, about what it is and what it isn't. However, I believe that sharing my experience can help many people understand life and its mysteries, and I hope it can bring them some understanding as well, to understand death. I'm not claiming that by sharing this, I definitely know what happens when we die or why we are here. Ultimately, I feel that I have integrated certain sensations within me about how life truly operates, rather than how we perceive it to be. It seems to me that we have constructed a movie. Moreover, it's like a poorly made and complicated movie. We have constructed a movie, and some people might argue that I haven't had their experiences. Well, I have also had negative experiences that led me to believe life was unpleasant, right? However, now I understand that life is inherently good and we all contribute to shaping it. We are empowering a space that feels distinct from the previous space I mentioned. This space is dense, and here it is easier to have, feel, and experience negative emotions. It is much easier to dwell in negativity than to embrace positivity. Here, destruction is easier than creation, and this is evident even in the physical. Consider the time it takes to construct a skyscraper versus how swiftly it can be demolished. It may take months or even years to build, but it can be torn down in a matter of minutes. However, it never takes only 5 minutes to build it. It is clear that here, both the physical laws and the emotional ones tend to lean towards chaos, destruction, separation, and violence. It seems that these aspects are ingrained in the resistance we encounter. But what does it mean? Are we destined to live in bitterness and condemnation within this existence? I don't personally feel this way so much, but I do believe it is important to strive for understanding. I think each of us must be responsible for what we do, and above all, what is important is where we are moving from, what is our true will, what is behind it. Then what happens or not will also depend on the fact that this dimension is like that. Is that part of the movie? Let's forgive ourselves and others, as it is indeed easy to be consumed by emotional and physical chaos here. I perceive this as a temporary experience, simultaneously unreal and real. It's as if life itself, the universe, existence, God, or whatever name we assign to it, already loves us just as we are. And perhaps this is simply an experience that stays with us for when we depart from here. It serves as a reminder of what we wouldn't want to repeat, a lesson that says, look, now that I have experienced it and realized how unpleasant it can be, I appreciate the goodness of home even more. How to etch these things in fire. No, I wouldn't repeat them. They are not beneficial. Perhaps when we depart, not here, because here we judge others based on their actions, whether they are good or bad. And that is also part of the density. On the other side, there is no judgment. You feel that everybody is wonderful, and you are also wonderful at the same level. Therefore, entering into judgment, separation, rejection, condemnation, or saying I wouldn't have done it is inevitable. We have all experienced these things, and we will continue to do so because it is part of the density. However, what I encourage people to do is to observe from where they are engaging in these behaviors internally. In other words, with what intention are they acting? You can strive to uphold your ethics and values, but it may not always be achievable due to we are in a large density. So nothing happens. But the important thing is that you initially made an effort. That is, you had the intention to do no harm, not to judge. I feel that life operates on such a simple mechanism, where we take responsibility for our intentions rather than obsessing over the outcomes. Because, in the end, we don't have as much control as we tend to believe. It's not that life is highly predetermined, but rather that we possess a great deal of ignorance. Additionally, I have come to realize that we must approach life with humility. With the limited knowledge I have acquired about the intricacies of existence, who am I to pass judgment or decide this is right, this is wrong? So let's refrain from pretending to be bad gods. To me, a judgmental deity who tells you that you have sinned or done well is a negative concept. Ultimately, it's challenging to perceive things clearly, especially if you've only had the experience of life prior to this revelation. It's natural to fall into such thought patterns. But when you have that experience and you witness and perceive the alternate reality, which feels much more real than this one, you start to perceive life in a different way. I describe this experience so that people can grasp why I refer to it as hyper-real and consider this reality as something artificial, like a dreamlike state. I always use that example because there is no better example than that, unless you possess the ability to have lucid dreams, which means being aware that you are dreaming while in the dream. In such a case, you can consciously realize that it's just a dream and decide to wake up. However, for the majority of people, when they are in a dream, they are unaware that it is a dream, and they believe it to be real. In fact, perhaps as you don't remember life in the dream, it's understandable that you wouldn't recall your existence here. If you did remember, you would recognize that you are dreaming and have the awareness that you are in bed and can wake up. Therefore, when you are immersed in the dream becomes your sole reality and the only thing that exists for you at that moment. So if something negative happens to you in the dream, it affects you and you have a difficult time. If someone says something to you in the dream, you take it seriously and give it power, without realizing that it was just a dream and nothing actually happened. It's like imagining that in a dream I am being tortured or my arm is being cut off and believing it, exclaiming, "Oh my God!" And then I wake up and realize that nobody has tortured me. I'm in my bed and I still have both arms. I understand that everything that happened in the dream was not as real as it seemed, and it doesn't have any actual consequences. I still have my arm, that's on one hand. Then when you recognize that the dream had little significance or weight, you come to realize that this reality, in comparison, feels more real in general. Okay, there are people who have dreams that are closely connected to the other side. However, you don't realize this until you wake up and enter this reality. Once you're in this reality and you reflect on the dream, you come to realize that it was just a dream. It was like a movie. I believed it, I suffered, but it wasn't real. No, nothing has happened. Here I am, still intact, still myself, right? Well, it's the same thing. That's what I felt. It was the same, but in reverse, like taking a step further. I mean, right now it's as if we are inside a dream. We believe it, we suffer with it, we believe that someone has wronged us, and therefore we have to seek revenge or something of that sort. I think I have lost an arm, but when we wake up, that is, when we die, we transition into another reality where my arm is not missing. I look back and realize that all of this was just another dream. At least that's how I perceive it. And what happens? While you're in the dream, you don't know you're dreaming unless you wake up at some point. It's as if I have been awakened in the middle of the night and become aware that all of this is a dream, at least for me. This experience has helped me not to attach too much importance to this dimension and to perceive it more like a movie or a bad dream. Yes, sometimes it feels like a bad dream, sometimes it can be a good dream, but that's all it is. We shouldn't attach too much significance to it. We must learn to enjoy it while it lasts, because in the humility of acknowledging that I know nothing, I will eventually discover. Here it is difficult to grasp the absolute truth, because of the density that there is and the emotions and so on. Therefore, based on this difficulty and my own experiences, I choose to believe that all of this is like a movie and should not be excessively emphasized. That's right, we suffer because we believe in the dream. It is true, but ultimately that's all it is, so that's my experience.